In the heart of the Wild West, where the land stretched endlessly beneath a vast sky, lived a widow named Margaret. She was a woman of quiet strength, her eyes reflecting the fierce spirit that had carried her through the darkest times. Margaret had lost her husband to illness a year prior, leaving her to navigate life alone on their modest homestead. With only her loyal German shepherd, Scout, by her side, she faced each day as it came. The small plot of land they called home was remote and unforgiving. The winds howled like lost souls, and the bitter cold of winter loomed on the horizon. Yet, Margaret was not one to cower in fear. She had learned to adapt, finding ways to make do with what little she had. The townsfolk whispered about her tenacity, their voices carried on the wind as they passed by her homestead, some with admiration, others with doubt. "Look at Margaret," they would say. "She thinks she can survive out there all alone." But the truth was, she found solace in the solitude. There was something calming about the quiet hours spent tending to her small garden or watching Scout chase after rabbits in the tall grass. Each morning began with a determined spirit as she rolled up her sleeves and set about her work. One day, as the sun dipped low in the sky and painted the world in hues of orange and pink, Margaret looked at the sparse supplies around her. The thought of winter filled her with dread. She couldn't afford to be unprepared. She pondered how to build a shelter that could withstand the coming storms. "That's it, Scout," she exclaimed, kneeling next to her dog's eager face. "We'll build a sod cabin. It will keep us warm and safe." Scout barked excitedly as if he understood every word. That night, under a blanket of stars, Margaret began to form a plan in her mind. Her heart raced with hope as she envisioned a cabin made from large rough bricks of dried grass, strong enough to withstand even the fiercest winter winds. With determination ignited within her, Margaret knew it would take hard work and grit, but she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together with Scout, they would create a home that protected them from the harshness outside, a fortress born from resilience and love. As the days grew shorter and the chill in the air intensified, Margaret faced a reality harsher than any winter storm. Following the recent loss of her husband, she had already experienced deep sorrow, but being thrown out of their home before winter was a new trial. With no means to pay for another place and nowhere to turn, she was left with only her land, the wild expanse that had once felt like a blessing. Each day felt daunting as she surveyed what little remained. The garden they had so lovingly tended now seemed barren, and it offered only the faintest hope for sustenance. Rumors spread through town, questioning her ability to cope alone. "She thinks she can make it out there," townsfolk muttered with a mix of pity and disbelief. But Margaret, fortified by her determination, refused to let those whispers defeat her spirit. Every morning began with Scout nudging her awake. His eager tail wagging brought a small glimmer of joy amid uncertainty. Together they ventured out, searching for wild edibles in the underbrush or gathering firewood from fallen branches nearby. The task demands physical strength, which she discovered she possessed in abundance. With each handful of dirt she dug or every brick of sod she crafted, she focused on survival rather than despair. As the biting cold seeped into her bones, Margaret wrapped herself in layers of threadbare clothing, yet pride kept her chin lifted high. She often caught herself talking to Scout about their plans. "Don't worry, boy. We've got this," she reassured him during their breaks beneath the large oak trees that swayed gently overhead. Facing countless obstacles each day taught her resilience. There were days when hunger gnawed at her stomach and nights when fear crept in like an unwelcome guest. Still, Margaret's inner fire burned brightly. She negotiated with nature's harshness, learning its rhythms and secrets, as if it were a part of an unwritten pact between herself and the world around her. With a fierce commitment to build their future despite limited resources looming around her, Margaret stood firm against adversity. Each moment spent planning for their sod cabin was an investment in hope, a belief that even beneath the harshest conditions, life could thrive again if one dared to dream along with determination and hard work. As Margaret stood on the windswept plains, her mind raced with thoughts of how to survive the impending winter. The townspeople had long talked about building homes from wood, but her situation left her with no means to purchase such materials. After days of contemplating her options, a spark of inspiration struck. She remembered how the early settlers had crafted their homes from sod, using the very earth beneath their feet to create sturdy shelters. Why not, she murmured to herself, glancing at the thick patches of grass surrounding her. I can make bricks out of dried grass. It's right here, and it's free. With a newfound sense of purpose, Margaret set out to gather materials. She began by cutting large squares from the grass and digging up chunks of soil beneath it. The process was laborious, but she felt invigorated by the creative challenge ahead. This is my chance, she said to Scout as he watched her work with curious eyes. We'll be warm and safe in our own little home. As Margaret shaped the sod into rough bricks, she marveled at how resourceful she could be when faced with dire circumstances. Each brick reflected her determination. They were made from a mixture of dried grass and earth that would hold together like glue once compacted in layers. She imagined how these simple yet strong structures would stand against winter's fury, shielding them from biting winds and swirling snow. The excitement grew as she envisioned the cabin taking shape, a place where they could curl up together during cold nights and find comfort amid adversity. With every brick she formed, Margaret felt a sense of empowerment washing over her. This wasn't just a shelter, it would be a testament to her resilience and creativity. She spent hours collecting more grass for bricks while Scout kept her company, occasionally barking at passing rabbits or chasing after fluttering birds. Underneath the bright blue sky, Margaret found joy in this labor of love, knowing that each piece brought them one step closer to having a home. At sunset, as golden rays dipped below the horizon, Margaret looked at the piles of sod bricks ready for construction. Her heart swelled with hope and determination. This sod cabin would not only protect them from winter, it would symbolize new beginnings born from her unyielding spirit and refusal to surrender to despair. With the sun rising over the horizon, Margaret felt a surge of determination as she prepared to gather the materials needed for her sod cabin. She knew that time was of the essence, winter would soon blanket the plains, and each moment spent gathering resources brought her one step closer to shelter. Armed with a sharp spade and her unwavering spirit, she ventured into the tall grass that surrounded her homestead. The process began with careful selection. She knelt down, assessing the thick patches of grass that grew in abundance. This will do nicely, she said softly to Scout, who wagged his tail in agreement. Margaret cut large squares of sod, each piece rich with earth and roots. The task required strength and precision. She dug deep to ensure each brick would be sturdy enough to form a solid wall for her cabin. As Margaret worked, beads of sweat formed on her brow, but she welcomed the physical exertion. She filled her arms with freshly cut sod, relishing the earthy scent that filled her senses. When her arms grew weary, she took a moment to rest, leaning against a nearby tree while Scout basked in the warmth of the sun. Just a little longer, boy, she encouraged him, aware that every moment spent gathering materials meant they were one step closer to having a home. After several hours of collecting, Margaret dragged her load back to the clearing where she planned to build. She arranged the sod bricks in neat stacks, admiring the artistry of nature that would soon become their shelter. Each brick required preparation. She rolled them in her hands and pressed them together to make sure they held their shape. The sun began setting as she finished assembling her first batch of bricks. Margaret looked at her work with pride, a pile of rough sod bricks that would be the foundation for their future. Tomorrow, we start building, she told Scout with a bright smile. That evening, as she sat beside the fire cooking a simple meal, Margaret reflected on the day's labor. The hard work had tested her physically but also filled her with hope. She understood that each brick was not just a piece of earth shaped into form, it represented her dedication and unyielding spirit. There was something magical about transforming natural resources into safety and warmth. In that quiet moment, under a sky full of stars, Margaret felt confident they would endure whatever winter had in store for them. With the last rays of sunlight illuminating the horizon, Margaret took a deep breath and prepared to begin the construction of her sod cabin. The time had come to transform those carefully made bricks into a sturdy refuge. She surveyed the clearing, envisioning in her mind how each layer would fit together to create a warm home. Margaret knelt down, placing the first sod brick on the ground. "Here we go, Scout," she said with determination. Carefully, she applied mud from a nearby stream as mortar, slathering it on the bottom of the brick before stacking another on top. The texture was rough, but she reveled in the feel of the earth in her hands. Each brick was heavy, yet they felt like building blocks for hope. As she continued to build upwards, Margaret realized that positioning each brick required both strength and strategy. She pressed them tightly together to ensure stability, making sure no gaps remained that could let in the cold winter air. "This will be our fortress against the storms," she told Scout, who watched intently, his tail wagging with excitement at her side. With every row she added, Margaret felt a growing sense of accomplishment. The sight of her cabin taking shape filled her with pride and urgency. She worked tirelessly through the day, taking breaks only to sip water and rest briefly against a sturdy tree. Though exhaustion settled into her bones as night approached, she refused to stop. Each time she laid another brick, Margaret reminded herself of what this cabin represented, a safe haven not just for her, but for Scout too. "We'll make it through this winter together," she reassured him as they took another moment to pause and survey their progress. The final touch of each layer included more mud between bricks, an act that connected not only the bricks but symbolized her dedication to building something lasting. As darkness fell and stars twinkled overhead, Margaret placed one last brick at the end of the day, announcing aloud to Scout, "That's enough for today. Tomorrow we'll finish it." Feeling accomplished yet weary, she stepped back to admire what she had created so far, a beginning that promised warmth amid uncertainty. The sod cabin stood strong against the encroaching chill. It was more than just walls, it was a promise of resilience and survival amid life's challenges, a testament to her unwavering spirit and ingenuity in overcoming adversity. Once the sod cabin was complete, life for Margaret and Scout settled into a routine filled with both challenges and small joys. The thick walls of their new home provided much-needed insulation against the biting cold that swept across the plains. Each morning, Margaret would wake to the soft sound of Scout's tail thumping against the earthen floor as he nudged her awake. "All right, boy, let's see what the day brings," she would say, stretching her arms and feeling grateful to be sheltered from winter's harshness. To keep warm, they relied on a simple fire made from gathered branches stacked in a small stone fireplace. Margaret carefully fed the flames with kindling she had collected nearby and watched as they flickered and danced, casting a warm glow throughout the cozy cabin. She would often sit close to the fire with Scout curled up beside her, sharing warmth and comfort during long evenings. "You're my best friend, Scout," she'd whisper, knowing they were in this together. Finding food was another challenge, however, Margaret refused to let it deter her. Each day began with exploring the fields around their cabin. With Scout by her side, she learned to recognize edible plants and wild berries that grew in abundance during this season. "Look over there," she'd point excitedly at a patch of bushes heavy with ripe berries. Together they would forage until their baskets were full. In addition to foraging, Margaret had brought along some seeds from her garden earlier in the year. She planted them in small patches near their home and tended to them daily, hoping they would sprout into a modest harvest before winter set in fully. "Soon we'll have fresh greens," she told Scout eagerly as she watered the earth with careful hands. Evenings were spent preparing whatever meal they could manage from their finds. Whether it was rabbit stew cooked over the fire or wild greens tossed together in a simple salad, every meal felt like a feast in their little haven. Not bad for a couple of survivors, Margaret often joked with Scout as they shared their dinner. Through it all, gathering food and managing the chores, Margaret found strength in each task. The sod cabin became more than just shelter, it transformed into a symbol of hope and resilience against adversity. As winter settled outside like a thick blanket of snow, inside their cabin warmth flourished, a reminder that together they could face anything life threw their way. As the weeks passed and word spread about Margaret's sod cabin, curious townsfolk began to venture out into the wild to see what she had accomplished. The whispers that once questioned her ability to survive alone transformed into murmurs of surprise and intrigue. It was a chilly morning when a group of neighbors, led by the local blacksmith, decided to pay her a visit. "Can you believe she actually built it?" one man said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I thought she'd never manage." When they arrived at her homestead, Margaret was outside, gathering herbs for dinner. She looked up to see their faces filled with astonishment as they took in the sight of her sturdy sod cabin standing proudly amidst the frost-kissed grass. "Good morning." Margaret greeted them, wiping her hands on her apron. "What brings you out here?" The blacksmith stepped forward, a mix of respect and admiration in his eyes. "We came to see this cabin everyone has been talking about," he replied. "You've done remarkable work, Margaret." Margaret felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "Thank you. It's taken a lot of effort, but I believe it will keep us safe through the winter," she replied, glancing over at Scout, who wagged his tail happily at the familiar faces. As they began to look around, the townsfolk couldn't help but touch the walls, feeling the solidness of the sod bricks and marveling at the craftsmanship. "It's amazing how you used what nature provided," a woman exclaimed with wide eyes. "You've really made something out of nothing here." Margaret shared stories of how she had gathered each piece and built her refuge brick by brick. The more she spoke, the more they listened intently, fascinated by her resilience and creativity amid such hardship. "I underestimated your spirit, Margaret," said another neighbor with an apologetic smile. "You've shown us all what determination can achieve." As they prepared to leave, the group offered assistance for any future projects or repairs that may arise, something Margaret had never expected. "If you ever need help or supplies," the blacksmith added kindly, "just let us know." That evening, as she sat beside the fire with Scout curled up at her feet, Margaret reflected on their visit. The townspeople's surprise transformed into admiration felt like a reassuring embrace against winter's chill. Their change of heart not only lifted Margaret's spirits but also deepened her sense of community. She realized she was not alone in facing life's challenges after all. With renewed hope and confidence filling her heart, she knew that together they could brave whatever storms lay ahead. As winter settled in, Margaret and Scout faced unforeseen challenges that tested their resilience. The first snowstorm hit unexpectedly one evening, transforming the landscape into a swirling sea of white. The wind howled outside, rattling the sod cabin as Margaret huddled close to the fire, watching the snow pile against the door. "Looks like we're in for a long night, Scout," she murmured, rubbing his fur to keep them both warm. The storm raged on, blocking paths and covering their foraging grounds with thick layers of snow. As the hours passed, Margaret's heart sank at the thought of dwindling food supplies. They had just enough provisions for a few days, but if the storms continued, they might not be able to gather more. The next morning dawned bright and cold, with sunlight reflecting off the fresh snow. After the storm subsided, Margaret donned her warmest coat and stepped outside, determined to find something to eat. "Let's go see what we can forage," she told Scout, who wagged his tail in agreement. As they trudged through the deep snow, Margaret's spirits lifted at the sight of a few evergreen bushes poking above the white blanket. She bent down to inspect them, finding tiny berries still clinging to the branches. "Look, Scout! We found lunch," she exclaimed as she carefully picked the berries and filled her small basket. However, food was scarce, and each day became a battle against hunger. Margaret learned to stretch their meals creatively, mixing wild greens with whatever little they had left. "Not bad for a couple of survivors," she would joke with Scout as they dined on their simple fare. But even as she faced these challenges, Margaret understood that strength came from perseverance. When another storm blew through, burying their cabin under more snow, she took it as an opportunity to reinforce their shelter. "We need to make sure our home stays strong," she said decisively while working on the roof. She packed extra sod against the walls to insulate them further against the cold. Days turned into weeks, and every challenge strengthened her resolve. The local townsfolk occasionally offered help with supplies when they could reach her through the snow. Their kindness reminded her that community could be a lifeline even in isolation. One particularly bitter night, as she sat by the fire with Scout curled up beside her, Margaret reflected on how far they had come. "We've made it this far," she whispered to him, determination etched on her face. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." In that moment, she knew that no matter how fierce winter became, her spirit would not falter. During those long, cold winter nights in the sod cabin, the bond between Margaret and Scout deepened significantly. As fierce winds howled outside, she would often find herself wrapped in a blanket, seated near the crackling fire with Scout resting his head on her lap. There was a comfort in their silence, a mutual understanding that helped ward off the loneliness that sometimes crept in. "Can you believe we've made it this far?" she would say softly, scratching behind Scout's ears. His tail thumped happily against the floor, and his gentle presence soothed her worries. In those moments together, both felt like they were more than just owner and pet, they were partners sharing the same fight for survival. Each day, as Margaret trekked into the biting cold to gather food or firewood, Scout never left her side. He would sniff around for anything edible while keeping a watchful eye on her. When she stumbled through deep snow or struggled to lift heavy logs, Scout stood ready, and Margaret frequently relied on him for encouragement. "Come on, Scout! You're my strong support," she'd laugh as he bounded ahead, always eager to help. Throughout their daily adventures, there was an underlying rhythm to their relationship. In many ways, Scout's unwavering loyalty inspired Margaret. She realized that her determination mirrored his instincts. They were both fighters adapting to their environment. "All we have is each other," she would remind him during mealtime. As they shared simple dishes made from foraged greens and berries, Margaret always made sure to save a small piece for him first. "For my best friend," she'd say with a grin. On particularly tough days when hunger loomed or snowstorms raged outside, they would sit together by the fire and find solace in each other's company. Scout's warmth provided a sense of security that reminded Margaret they could face any challenge as long as they had one another. "No matter how tough it gets, we'll figure it out," she'd whisper while hugging him close. As winter dragged on, it became clear to Margaret that life with Scout was about more than survival, it was about partnership and love. They faced challenges together. Food shortages were met with teamwork in searching for wild roots, while heavy snowfall led them to reinforce their home collectively. In all of this, Margaret felt a profound sense of gratitude for her loyal companion. "Thank you for being with me through it all," she often said before bedtime, looking at Scout with love overflowing in her heart. In the solitude of winter's harsh embrace, their bond flourished as a light that brightened the darkest times, proof that love could thrive even in the toughest of circumstances. As spring began to melt away the snow and warm the earth, Margaret emerged from the depths of winter with a renewed sense of purpose. Word had spread about her remarkable sod cabin, and the townspeople who once doubted her now looked upon her with respect and admiration. The transformation was not just in their perception but also within Margaret herself, who had grown stronger and more confident through her trials. On a bright morning, she decided to host a gathering at her homestead. "Let's celebrate the arrival of spring," she announced to Scout as she prepared simple snacks made from wild herbs and berries they had foraged. She wanted to share not only her success but also the warmth that had blossomed within her heart during those long winter months. When the day arrived, several neighbors turned up, bringing along their families, eager to see the cabin for themselves. "Margaret, you've done an incredible job," one neighbor exclaimed as they approached. Their faces were lit with genuine smiles as they explored the structure that stood firm against the harshest elements of winter. Children played nearby while adults gathered around to speak with Margaret about her experiences. "I never thought you could build something so strong on your own," another woman said, her voice filled with encouragement. "You're a true inspiration." Margaret felt a wave of gratitude wash over her as she shared stories of hardships faced and lessons learned alongside Scout, who roamed happily among visitors, accepting pats and attention from everyone. The strong bond she shared with him became evident as he sat loyally by her side, embodying the spirit of resilience they both had cultivated. This new chapter in Margaret's life brought unexpected opportunities. Local women who admired her determination began to visit regularly, forming friendships centered around shared challenges and support. They exchanged knowledge about gardening techniques and food preservation methods, turning their small community into one that thrived on collaboration rather than competition. As weeks turned into months, Margaret found herself not just surviving but flourishing in this supportive network. She even started teaching others how to create sod bricks for building small structures or garden beds, sharing what she had learned through trial and error. With each day that passed, Margaret realized that building the sod cabin was only the beginning. It symbolized resilience but also ignited connections that would uplift them all. The love and camaraderie forged during winter transformed into lasting friendships that brightened their lives in ways she had never imagined. Looking back at where she started, the struggle she faced alone, Margaret smiled warmly at Scout beside her. Together, they had transformed adversity into a new beginning filled with hope and community support. It was proof that even in challenging times, love could blossom anew when nurtured by resilience and friendship.